You're listening to the Joy Tax Podcast, a conversation series for parents and caregivers raising a child or teen with complex chronic conditions. The normal parenting wisdom doesn't fit the situations we are living through. This is a forum to share, affirm, and learn from each other. It's also a window for allies to listen in and gain deeper insight into the world we inhabit. This podcast is not a substitute for medical guidance. We encourage you to always talk to your healthcare provider before making any medical decisions. This is the Joy Tax Podcast, and I'm Mercedes Harness, the host. A handful of years ago, my daughter began having what then felt like mysterious symptoms. She was sick all the time, she got every bug, and would be down for a long time. Her sore throat was constant. She developed wild skin flares. Her sleep was inconsistent and unrefreshing. She had terrible headaches and body pain and brain fog. And then she began saying things like, "It feels like all the energy is leaving my body." She was 9. For those listeners who have children and teens with dysautonomia, ME/CFS, MCAS, long COVID, and other chronic energy limiting conditions, this probably sounds familiar. So I did what we do. I researched, read scientific studies. Um, Her dad and I took her to all the doctors that were recommended in my state. And then we took her out of state to a fancy clinic. And when that was limited, I found a private pay complex medicine specialist. I wanted desperately to turn off whatever terrible thing was happening to my daughter. But in between all the appointments and so often disappointments and blood draws and therapies and tests, she was still a child, living on the couch or on my bed, sometimes unable to walk. So I began looking for other kinds of advice. Where was the book on how to raise a child too unwell to get out of bed? How do you give a child a life when exerting any small amount of energy results in a payback and declining baseline? This is a conversation series with parents and caregivers about how to raise kids and teens who have chronic, poorly understood conditions. The normal parenting wisdom doesn't fit the situations we are living through. I have found a lot of comfort from talking with other moms and parents who have navigated this upside down world, and I hope to offer listeners a similar kind of comfort. I cannot give you medical advice or tell you how to heal your child, but I can affirm the experiences that we are living through and create a forum for these discussions where we can learn from each other. The show is named for one of the key symptoms of ME/CFS, post exertional malaise, or PEM, or what our family calls joy tax, which is simply a worsening of symptoms after physical, cognitive, emotional, or social exertion. Sometimes the resulting crash can be mild. Sometimes it can lower a person's baseline for weeks, months, or years. Today, I've invited Suzan Jackson onto the show. I think you are intrepid for being here because this is a new project, and I'm so grateful that you agreed to come on. My friend who has had ME/CFS for much of her life directed me to your blog when she learned that my child was having these challenges. And I immediately found it to be such a comforting resource. And your blog gives such a wonderful overview of what it's like in the beginning stages, all the way through your children are raised now. Can you begin by giving us a little bit of your family's background?
Sure. Thank you so much, Mercedes, for asking me to be on the podcast. Um, Everything you said sounded very familiar. Our family story is long and complicated, but I will try to keep it very short. On March 1st, 2002, I suddenly went from being a very healthy, active, energetic person to being very sick. And 75 to 80% of us with ME/CFS had it start like that very abruptly. It took me, though, a year, more than a year of seeing specialists. And as you said, hundreds of blood tests, dozens of doctors. Nobody knew what was wrong with me. About a year later, I finally stumbled on I was looking for a primary care physician. She was accepting new patients in about 5 minutes from my home, so that's what I chose. And I really lucked out because in that first visit, when I came in with my 3 ring binder full of, my symptoms and the patterns I was seeing that made no sense to me and all those lab tests, she knew in that first meeting that I had ME/CFS. And but chronic fatigue syndrome sounded like something made up to me. So I went and looked it up on my own, and I was shocked because for the first time in a year, something perfectly matched my experience. I was also very fortunate that she's one of the few primary care physicians, not just locally, but in the world, that actually has experience with this and knows how to treat it. So, the basics at least. And so she started treating me, and I started to feel better. But then in 2004, 2 years after I got sick, both of my sons started developing the same symptoms. My younger son and my husband had had a cold that summer, some kind of virus, generic virus.
Mhm.
In most families, your kids get these all the time. You don't think anything of it. We were on vacation. Those two weren't feeling well. They had a cough that lingered for about 6 weeks. So now I'm wondering if maybe it was a SARS family virus. And and then my husband recovered, but the two kids developed symptoms eerily similar to mine. And we didn't want to believe it. I mean, even having been what we'd been through and recognizing it, that is not a reality you want to accept for your children. They were 6 and 10 at the time.
When my daughter got sick, it was gradual. I know a lot of people have, they had a virus and then they knew immediately that they didn't recover. With your kids, was it a gradual recognition or was it like a switch went off?
The onset of their symptoms was immediate.
Okay,
And that's why my husband and I believe it was that virus. My older son and I didn't catch the virus, but we were all exposed to it.
that's fascinating.
Um, yeah, and from then on, the kids just the typical stuff with ME/CFS, they'd run around like normal kids and then be wiped out the next day. Sore throats, just complete exhaustion. Not normal. These were normal, energetic 6 and 10-year-old boys. They were normally really active.
I
And just
remember.
like I'm sorry.
Oh, no, go. I'm sorry, I interrupted you. Continue.
I was just gonna say, just like with me, their symptoms were very up and down, which is different for different people. For some people, they're always in at the same place, but for the boys and for me, there were good days, there were bad days, so, we didn't quite know what was going on.
When I first read about ME/CFS and specifically post-exertional malaise, I remember, the day before my daughter had been playing out in the snow, and she came in and she said, "It's happening again, mom," and it was she gets heavy legs, and it felt like the energy was leaving her body, and then I discovered what PIM was, and I was terrified. How did you navigate the fear in the early days?
Well, you remember I had been through 2
Yeah,
years of it myself already, and that helped tremendously. Learning about post-exertional malaise, was life-changing for me because for a year and that's what that big binder was that I was taking to my doctor's appointments, there were graphs in there of, "This day I feel fine, and then the next day I feel awful. Well, what's
mhm,
going on?" To me, it seemed random. And then once my doctor gave me a name for it, and I found 2 books at my local library about it, and I just burst into tears reading those because they completely mirrored my experience for the first time ever. And, but learning about PEM was like a light bulb going off, because every time I felt better, I returned to my normal life.
yeah.
And then, of course, I would crash again. So I suddenly understood what those ups and downs were. So that was the main thing we saw with the kids that tipped us off.
No.
They'd seemed fine. Christmas that year, they were running around outside playing football with their grandfather, and they came in and were both so sick. And my husband and I knew what it was. And, everybody else kept making excuses, but we knew we recognized it. So our older son was sicker than the younger one, and the younger one was only 6. So I took the older one up to New York State to see Dr. Bell, renowned pediatric MECFS specialist, unfortunately now retired. Just an amazing man.
He's written
And
about in Osler's Web a lot. I read that the
yeah,
first
and
year we were going through this, and it's really powerful, the work that he did with children in the '80s and '90s.
it is. And his book was one of the two that I found at the library that helped me so much at the beginning. So, and he happens to be in a little town right near my hometown of Rochester, New York. So we went up there, visited my dad, and went to see Dr. Bell. And he confirmed that I did, I hadn't had a specialist or an expert confirm my diagnosis. So he did that. And he absolutely said, yes, your son has MECFS as well. Um, he said our symptoms and patterns were remarkably similar. And he said, I want to test your son for orthostatic intolerance. And I said, I've read about that. We don't have it. Neither one of us ever gets dizzy or faints. And he just, nodded knowingly and said, okay, let's run the test. I was shocked. 10 minutes of standing up in this cold doctor's office in Western New York in January. And my son was sweating, red faced, his legs were turning purple. They couldn't even complete the test. I mean, he couldn't even get through 10 minutes of standing. And he
Wow.
met the criteria for both POTS and neurally mediated hypotension. And
Wow.
that was the other eye-opening thing, seeing that test in front of my eyes. And Dr. Bell said, you would react the same way, but if I did that, I don't think you could get the two of you back home because we had to catch a flight that day. So learning about OI helped a lot. Our younger son, because his symptoms were milder, I talked to Dr. Bell about it that day and at a subsequent visit when all four of us went up. And he said, from all the kids he had seen, he said some kids do get a milder version and outgrow it. His advice was wait until it's affecting his life, affecting school before you diagnose him. Just keep an eye on him. You know what it looks like. And so we were seeing the ups and downs. Normal kids would get a cold and maybe miss a day or two of school. He'd get a cold and would be out for a week. Um, but
How did the school, treat you during that time? How was that experience navigating with them?
that during that time, it was okay. He wasn't diagnosed yet.
Okay.
We had a terrible battle with every single school we were involved in those four different schools
Wow.
from elementary all through high school. And college too. We had trouble at every step of the way. It blew my mind that administrators wouldn't want to help these kids as much as they could. But we ran into people at every school who fought it.
What
And
were they what parts were they fighting, do you think?
oh, well, our first dealing with the school was when our older son, I'm trying to think if he was diagnosed yet. It was the beginning of the school year. I think he was diagnosed. We didn't know about accommodations plans or anything like that. Um, he might not have even been diagnosed yet. I think it was that first fall after that summer when they got the virus. Um, so he went back to school, and our older son was straight A student. Every teacher loved him, typical older child, I think, very obedient, very, stick with the rules, lots of friends. And his fifth grade teacher called us in for a conference a few weeks into the school year. And we're sitting across from her, and she said, you have a defiant, disobedient child. And she said these horrible things. And we completely honestly looked at each other and said, you've got us mixed up with somebody else. Our son is, said
Mhm.
his name. And she was like, no, that's who I'm talking about. Oh, we were like, what? Well, it turned out our son's cognitive dysfunction, I mean, we hadn't noticed it during the summer, but his cognitive dysfunction had gotten so bad that the teacher would give instructions. The kids were supposed to work silently, and he couldn't hang on to the information. He couldn't remember what he was supposed to do, didn't understand. And so he would talk to a friend or look at a classmate's paper, and she took that as cheating
Mm,
instead of a child struggling.
that's terrible.
It was awful. It was such a I mean, we were in tears when we left there. Luckily, that elementary school had an amazing principal, and this was the case in every school we went to. There was always at least one staff member that you had to find
Mhm,
who could be your ally,
mhm,
but, and help you with the ones who didn't understand. So in that school, it was the principal. She'd known Jamie since he was in kindergarten, and, she said, I've never heard of this before. I've never done a 504 plan before, but she said, "We're gonna figure this out together." But yeah, we ran into that everywhere. So with our younger son, when we finally got him diagnosed was when the principal of he was at a different elementary school, and his principal called and said, it was like March. He said, "Your son has missed 35 days of school." And we were like, "Okay, we've been waiting for this. It's time to, officially diagnose him."
mhm.
By then, our pediatrician had learned enough from Dr. Bell and some of his cohorts that she was able to go through all the steps, rule out everything else, officially diagnose him. Wrote a letter to the school, but we didn't know the school nurse who had heard of MECFS but didn't believe our son had it because she had seen him on some good days. And our younger son was always really energetic. That's just him naturally, so she didn't see him on those days at home when
People don't
the
see it, right?
normal
That's why they call it an invisible illness, and people say, not all the time now. I think our community has been really, by and large, understanding of our situation, but they only see my daughter when it's good, and
I mean, it's that way with me still, so yeah.
yeah.
So the school nurse, we didn't realize we went to a 504 meeting and didn't know the school nurse had been telling the principal, "No, he doesn't have that." So we had a separate meeting with him and we showed him the doctor's letter that the nurse hadn't showed him. And he was like, "Oh, yeah, that's really clear." So, again, somebody gets in your way and you have to go around them and find an ally.
And before you
Um,
have that 504, it's such a vulnerable time. I remember I even thought that, well, if I take my daughter out of school and we homeschool, then she's going to be better. And that may have been true because you can pace better when you homeschool, but it wasn't as if she got well. It just actually allowed us to better have a better salient understanding of her day-to-day symptoms. And when you mentioned that your son started behaving differently in class, that really resonated because I think kids do develop different coping strategies in order to survive. Sometimes kids have more sensory challenges with the noise in the classroom. My daughter described that she would sneak away to the bathroom sometimes to pretend to throw up because nobody would believe that she was sick. And
Poor kid.
I know, and there's just such a sense the kids, I think, are so easily accused of school avoidance, or somehow parents are accused of not being supportive of education, and we know that it's not that at all. But once you have a 504, it seems that the schools are a little bit more obliged to follow what's on it. And I say seems because I know we're both on in Facebook groups where I see parents all the time struggling with getting their children's needs met, and it's such a huge variance across the country of kids getting their needs met.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just telling you this week in our emails that just last week I finished updating all of my blog posts about getting school accommodations. And boy, going through those, and I wanted to make sure they were all up to date and the links worked and everything, but reading back through those and those experiences we had, it was painful
It
because,
is.
like I said, we ran into roadblocks at every single school.
And
And there
what
was always, in the older grades where they had multiple teachers, there was always at least one teacher who didn't want to comply. And,
it's so
you're
difficult.
like, this is a legal requirement. Um, in high school, we had a vice principal who, when our older son needed homebound tutoring, he said, "No, we don't have the money for that." And we went around him and talked to the principal, and he heard the story and said, "Well, of course we're going to do what this student needs."
Mhm.
But every time it was such a battle. So the big thing I talk about in those blog posts, and I advise people constantly about this, is to get an educational advocate, and many of them work for free. We did not get one until our oldest son was a senior in high school, and I wish we had done it right at the beginning.
How does a person
It's
find an educational advocate?
so we got lucky because another I besides the online group I started that you're a part of, I also started a local group. And one of our local members, both parents were in education, teaching at the college level, but they had taught at all levels. They'd both been administrators. And so they hired out as educational advocates. So they were the ones that first told us about this. So when we were having trouble with the high school, I tried to bring our friend in. I mean, he did this professionally.
Mhm.
And this horrible vice principal said, wouldn't let me bring him into the meeting, which was illegal. But I was feeling awful that day. I was like practically shaking. My OI was so bad, and
Mm,
my husband must have been out of town because it was just me, and he bullied me.
I'm so
And he
sorry.
said he can't come into the meeting because his son goes to this school too, which is just, that's BS. That's
That's
not,
totally baloney, yeah.
yeah. So after that meeting, and I left there just in tears. There were a lot of tears in these years.
There there are a lot of tears.
But our friend said, "No problem. I'm going to set you up with a great advocate." And many of them work for free even. And ours did. Sometimes you pay a small fee, but look at local colleges. And that's where the one we ended up using came from. He was at Delaware State University. He worked with our friends, and all he had to do was come to one meeting, and he barely said anything. He introduced himself. He said he was there to be an independent educational advocate. And these teachers that had been putting up roadblocks at every instance suddenly were falling all over themselves
Wow.
to do what they should have done in the first place.
Having an advocate can be so, so powerful. Do you think that a friend who is knowledgeable could go in with a parent just to be that force? Would that make a difference?
Possibly. They would
Mhm.
have to be really knowledgeable in the law,
Yeah.
that educational law, whether you're getting a 504 plan or an IEP. Whoever you bring in as an advocate would have to be, very well versed in the law so that they could say, sorry, that's illegal. And there's the line in the law that says so. I mean, I write about that in the blog post, but having an outsider say that is so powerful.
Mhm. One of the things that doctors told me in the beginning was that, well, one pediatrician said, just send your daughter to school and she'll get over it. And then I took her to a faraway fancy clinic and they said that kids with, that time they had diagnosed her with autonomic nervous system dysfunction and that kids who stay connected with their schools have better outcomes. And I remember feeling so defeated because, or maybe not defeated, maybe I felt complicit in that moment in my daughter because she couldn't go to school, and she couldn't go to school without crashing, and it was a I'm this is the first fall This is, knock on wood, the most normal fall we've had in a long time. She's going to school, 3
Right.
mornings a week, and it's amazing. Um, but what would you say to the parents whose kids aren't well enough to go to school, who going
Yeah.
to school is harmful for them?
So, for us, it was never really a choice. First of all, I was sick, so homeschooling was out.
Yeah,
Um, and our sons really wanted to be in
yeah.
school. And this is another thing we had to fight with the schools over. I mean, you would think they would want the kids there as much as possible. But in middle school, we were told if he's going to have homebound tutoring, he needs to be 100% homebound. And we were like, no, that's not what the law says. And that's not what's best for him. And we argued for hours with this whole staff in this meeting. And finally, we got through to the guidance counselor, who was the 504 coordinator. And I said something along the lines of, he wants to be here.
Mhm.
And what's best for him as a developing child is to be with his peers as much as possible and in a normal environment as much as possible. And she finally, like the light bulb went on. Talking in terms of what was best for the student, I think
Mm,
her guidance counselor instincts kicked in. And from then on, she was a fabulous ally.
that's great.
But, that year, they waived all non-academic requirements like, gym and art and all the other things. So that left 5 academic courses. 2 of the teachers were being really stubborn about working with him. So those are the 2 we gave to the homebound instructor,
That's great.
who was fabulous. She came to my son's college graduation party. She's just a wonderful person, was a big part of our lives. And then the other 3 classes, we agreed he could go when he felt up to it. So it was hard on me. I was driving him back and forth, sometimes, multiple times a day. I'd take
That's
him to one
hard.
class,
That's hard if you
go
don't have an
home.
energy limiting condition. I mean, that's
Yeah,
really
yeah.
demanding.
Pick him up for a nap and then take him back. But for him and in the condition he was in, that's what was best for him. So, I would just encourage parents to always think in terms of what's best for your child given where they are
Mm,
with this illness physically.
yeah,
Because you're right, some kids can't leave home.
yeah,
And in that case, it's really important to try to keep those social connections active for them. Try to keep them connected with their friends, and that's tough in childhood.
mhm. It is
Childhood is very much out of sight, out of mind
mhm,
for kids.
for sure.
Um, but if you can, have a friend over for a movie night or a movie afternoon if your kids can't stay up, you know, you have to do what you can to keep them connected. It's a little easier now with social media,
Mhm,
but that doesn't take the place of an in-person friendship.
absolutely.
Yeah,
I
and
know we're jumping around a little bit, but I wanna touch also
okay.
on, I mean, you're such an inspiration to me because your children launched. When you say when your child was in college, I have seen Facebook posts just this week about mothers' fears that their kids won't ever be able to go to college. Can you talk to the experience of launching a child with an energy limiting condition into adulthood?
Sure. Yeah, there's a chapter in my book on coming of age with chronic
Mhm.
illness with advice for the teens and young adults who are sick and stuck at home. Um, so our son, his senior year of high school, missed 90 days of school, 90. Um, that was when we brought the educational advocate in, and his teachers took it down to the bare minimum that he needed to graduate, and waived some exams and things like that. Um, he was still in terrible shape though. And he finished his last high school math exam the day before he left for college.
Wow.
So, he was working all that summer too to finish up. but it was a combination of medical supports and the kind of emotional supports as well.
Mhm.
Um, medically, we tinkered around with a few things that summer. I think we increased his orthostatic intolerance treatments that summer, which helped tremendously. That always helps. Dysautonomia is such a big part of this disease, and
Mhm.
it amazes me how many people are going around without any treatments for it because it's actually pretty treatable. It can take some trial and error to find the right treatments, but so in his case, there was just a lot we did that summer. We worked with a dietitian and who also had an MS in biochemistry. She was just brilliant, and she helped with diet and with supplements, just a bunch of stuff. I mean, we absolutely were afraid that he wasn't going to be able to go to college. We were afraid, just constant fear. We're still afraid.
Where do you put that fear? I mean, how do you live? I guess because with this disease, you don't ever get to know what
Yeah,
tomorrow's going to bring.
you try not to think too far into the future. You live day by day. You do what your kid needs that day, that
Mhm.
week, that month, and you focus on the here and now. Um, we were really big on making sure that there was plenty of joy in our
Mm.
household, which was a challenge because 3 of the
Totally.
4 of us were sick. But that just helped mentally,
I remember
you know?
telling a friend I was trying to explain post-exertional malaise, and I said, "We try to choose joy whenever possible, and sometimes, my daughter has energy to bake cookies or she has the energy to take a shower, and often we will choose baking cookies instead because that makes her smile. There are other times when, we all feel better when we're clean, the shower would end but that has always been my guiding force
Mhm.
is there joy in this? If she only has energy for 5 or 10 minutes today, what does that look
Right,
like?"
right. One of our friends from the local support group used to say, "Is this a crash-worthy activity?" Like her daughter would wanna do something, and she'd say, "Is this crash-worthy?" You're gonna crash afterward. Is it worth it? I wanted to mention her actually, going back to the school stuff, so her daughter was very, very sick in high school, too sick to attend
Mm,
classes, 100% homebound instruction, but her 504 plan allowed her to go into school whenever she was able for lunch and for an art class that met 2 or 3 times a week.
that's so important.
It is, and, luckily I think they had to fight for it too,
Mhm.
and I think they brought in an educational advocate, but that's what her daughter needed to do the academics at home, but to still have that chance to socialize and connect with her friends, with her peers.
I just wanna
So
say what you're describing that you did for your family and what you've written about on your blog and what your friend you just told me about your friend, all of that I feel has helped pave the way for long COVID parents and for parents who are living through it now. It doesn't mean that the systems are necessarily better because I think they're still just as complicated, but your information helps us know what we have the right to ask for. This year, when I spoke with the principal and the teachers, I didn't frame it as, can you help us in these ways? I said, my daughter needs. And I knew how to have that language because of what you and others have, and the ways that you have taught us how to advocate through your blogs and through what people share on the Facebook group. So I just want to say thank you for that. I know in the moment it might seem like it's just for your kid and your family, but it does have an impact beyond that. Absolutely.
I'm so glad to hear you say that, and I'm so thrilled that you found it helpful. Um, in a way, sharing what we've been through just makes all the suffering somewhat worthwhile,
Mhm.
if we can help other people. It means a lot to us, so
Can you talk
I'm
you
glad
talk
that
a lot about gratitude and it being such an important part of your life. And I have a complicated relationship with gratitude. I'm on the one hand so grateful for so much, the sound of my daughter's footsteps, being able to do an art project with her. Driving in the car to farmers market recently, and both kids were well enough, and we were just having a moment together. All those things bring me such joy. And yet I'm also angry at the world that our children have to live through this. So yeah, can you talk
yeah.
to that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I've been sick now for, 23 years, almost 24 now,
Mhm.
and my kids for 21. Well, the youngest did recover fully eventually. Um, you know, you I just learned pretty early on that negative emotions like anger, they hurt me more than they hurt anyone else.
It's true.
And I could, because I was dealing with the same illness myself, I mean, sometimes you need to express that anger, but you realize that anger, resentment, this is still a battle, resentment especially. I think I've gotten past a lot of the anger, but resentment at people close to me who don't understand, things like that.
Mhm.
But those kind of emotions just really wreck me
Yeah.
and they make me crash.
Yeah.
So yeah, we have just really tried to stay positive, but I hate to say that
I know.
because I don't mean like Pollyanna, everything's fine. We recognize that we've got all these challenges. Um, and our oldest son is fine, is living on his own now, working full time, supporting himself. Um, which, many times we never thought we would see this day.
Yeah. To
So
launch to
that
launch a
feels
human into the world and have them achieve adulthood and be able to do those things, that is remarkable under any circumstances, and especially the ones that your family lived through.
yeah, I think one thing that's funny, because I just went through this again, it's the start of a new school
Mm.
year. Um, and I'm not, there's nothing wrong with feeling this way, but so many parents, mothers especially, are like, "Oh, empty nest, my kid went off to college. How did you deal with this?" And I'm like, we were a combination of afraid and full of joy when our son started college
Yeah.
because we never thought he was going to be able to do that.
Yeah.
And he only did it with a lot of accommodations and a lot of treatments as
Yeah.
well. And it took him 6 years to finish his bachelor's degree because he could only take 3 classes at a time. But yeah, I didn't grieve over the kids leaving because we were just so thrilled they were healthy enough
Mhm.
to leave.
Yeah. Well, I wanna
Ooh,
thank you for being here
that's
today. I could ask you so many more questions. Again, I'm so grateful for the work that you've done. Do you have any parting words of wisdom that you would, give parents to get through this next week?
I think one of the most important things you can do is listen to your child.
Mhm.
Um, and that sounds really basic, but I mean, we don't wanna believe they're as sick as they are.
Yeah.
It hurts to believe
Mhm.
that.
Mhm.
And we've seen this in family members,
Mhm.
denial because they just don't want to accept that I could be this ill or that one of our kids could be this ill. But, you know, listen to because the number one important thing with this illness is listen to your body. So if you're a parent, listen to your kid,
Yeah.
go by their cues. If they say if they're normally, if they, when they were healthy, they loved school, and one morning they tell you they're too sick to go to school, you know, accept that and
Mhm.
help them live within their boundaries because I can tell you it's hard as an adult to set limits and, when there's things you wanna do. It's even harder for kids.
Especially when they
So
don't have agency. They don't get we're the final ones who tell them, "Oh, no, you really have to go to school. You can just stick it out," or, "You have to meet this obligation." That was I'm a person who likes to finish what I started, and this was really it still is a thing that I'm learning that sometimes you just get to let it down. Just get to set it
yeah.
down, I mean. How do people find your blog and your book?
The book is available pretty much everywhere. Amazon Bookshop, you can go into any library or local bookstore. If they don't have it, you can ask them to order it. Um, should be on all the online things. I am working on an audiobook. I've been working on it for 2 years, but I really hope to have it out by the end of the year. I'm editing right now, and I'm getting close to the end. It's been a difficult process, but hopefully so right now it's available in paperback and ebook, and it should be available in audio, definitely by next year.
Okay.
The blogs are kind of passé these days, I guess. It's not the newest form of, online communication, but so mine's on an old, site, Blogger. It's at www.livewithcfs.blogspot, blogspot.com.
And I'll put these in the
Um,
show notes as well.
okay, that'd be great.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
am
and I've got a YouTube channel where I've got I do a lot of videos on books and reading, on travel and outdoors, but also on chronic illness.
I didn't know you had a
It's okay
YouTube
to find
site.
a bright spot.
I'll have to go look
So,
for that.
yeah, my YouTube channel is simply Sue Jackson, DE for Delaware. So Sue Jackson, DE.
Okay.
Pretty easy to find.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you so much, and thank you to all of the listeners for tuning in today, and keep up the good work advocating for your kids and families.
Thank you, Mercedes.
Yeah,
I enjoyed talking with you.
thank you.